Today we're diving into a fascinating conversation with Larmbert Ebitu, a political affairs analyst from Uganda who's making waves in African geopolitics. He recently attended the ICES 2025 conference, and what he shared about Africa's future might surprise you. For those who aren't familiar with his work, Ebitu has been a prominent voice in African political discourse, regularly contributing to RT Media and various Ugandan publications. Let's talk about what Ebitu calls the third wave of global interest in Africa. Think about this. We've seen this pattern before. First, there was colonization, then the Cold War tug-of-war, and now everyone wants a piece of Africa. From Western powers to Gulf states, they're all developing strategies to engage with the continent. This renewed interest isn't just diplomatic, it's economic, cultural, and strategic. What makes this third wave different from previous ones is the sheer number of players involved. It's not just former colonial powers or Cold War protagonists anymore. We're seeing countries like China, India, Turkey, and the Gulf states all actively pursuing their interests in Africa. Each comes with their own agenda, their own promises, and their own vision for Africa's future. But here's where it gets interesting. While many experts suggest African nations should carefully choose their alliances, Ebitu throws a curveball. He argues this whole idea of choice is actually an illusion. It's like being offered a menu where someone else has already decided what dishes you can pick from. His message is clear. African nations need to take charge of their own destiny before jumping into external partnerships. The implications of this perspective are far-reaching. When we look at current international agreements, trade deals, and diplomatic relations, we often see terms that appear beneficial on the surface, but may actually perpetuate dependency. Ebitu suggests that African nations need to develop their own frameworks for international engagement, rather than simply accepting pre-existing ones. What's particularly striking is his take on foreign investment. You know how we often hear that direct foreign investment is this magical solution for developing economies? Well, Ebitu challenges this notion. He suggests these investments might actually be holding back local businesses from growing. It's like trying to grow a garden in the shade of a massive tree. Sometimes what looks like protection is actually preventing growth. He points to specific examples where foreign investment has created enclave economies, islands of prosperity that don't really connect with or benefit the broader local economy. This isn't just about money, it's about economic sovereignty and the ability of African nations to chart their own development path. Now let's talk about Pan-Africanism, because this is where Ebitu's passion really shines through. He makes an interesting comparison with the European Union. Think about it. Europe isn't one homogeneous bloc, right? They've got different languages, cultures, histories, yet they've found ways to work together. Ebitu argues Africa can do the same, maybe even better, because African nations share more common ground than we often realize. This concept of Pan-African unity isn't just idealistic thinking. Ebitu points to concrete areas where African cooperation could make a real difference. Take infrastructure development, for example. Individual African countries might struggle to fund major projects, but together they could create transportation networks that would rival anything in the developed world. The same goes for technology and innovation. Rather than each country trying to build its own Silicon Valley, why not pool resources and create technology hubs that serve multiple nations? This kind of cooperation could accelerate development across the continent. But here's where the conversation gets really interesting. The power of narrative. Ebitu talks about something he calls narrative warfare. In today's world, he says, battles are won in people's minds before they're won on the ground. It's like social media and traditional media are the new front lines of modern influence. This concept of narrative warfare is particularly relevant when we consider how Africa is portrayed globally. The persistent negative stereotypes, the focus on conflict and poverty rather than innovation and growth, these aren't just media biases. They're part of a larger narrative that shapes how the world engages with Africa. Speaking of media, Ebitu raises a crucial point about information flow in Africa. Western media channels are everywhere, even in remote villages. It's not just about news, it's about cultural influence. Imagine if most of your stories, your information, your worldview came from sources that might not have your best interests at heart. This media dominance has real consequences. It affects everything from policy decisions to investment patterns to cultural identity. When African stories are primarily told through a Western lens, it's not just about misrepresentation, it's about power and control. The solution. Ebitu suggests Africa needs to build its own strong media platforms. It's not about shutting out other voices. It's about adding Africa's voice to the global conversation. He talks about using social media and modern communication tools, but with an African perspective. He envisions a network of African media outlets that could tell African stories authentically, promote African interests, and counter misleading narratives. This isn't just about news reporting. It's about creating content that reflects African values, aspirations, and worldviews. What's particularly refreshing about this interview is how Ebitu balances critique with optimism. He's not just pointing out problems, he's suggesting practical solutions. He emphasizes the need for Africa to develop unified foreign policies and even a consolidated military force. It's about building a strong foundation before reaching out to form global partnerships. The military aspect is particularly interesting. Ebitu argues that a unified African military force could help stabilize regions, respond to crises, and reduce dependency on external military support. This isn't about aggression. It's about self-reliance and security. One of the most powerful moments in the interview comes when Ebitu discusses the importance of trust in governance. He argues that while it's crucial to protect people from misinformation, it's equally important to trust them to make informed decisions. It's a delicate balance between protection and empowerment. This trust extends to economic policy as well. Ebitu suggests that African governments need to trust their own people's entrepreneurial spirit rather than always looking outside for solutions. Local businesses, he argues, often understand local needs better than foreign investors. His experience in Eritrea, where the interview took place, adds another layer to the conversation. He notes the peace and tranquility he found there, something he says is rare in other cities. It's a reminder that Africa isn't a monolith. Each country, each city has its own character and story to tell. The key takeaway: Africa's future isn't about choosing between existing options, it's about creating new ones. It's about building strength from within before engaging with the world on equal terms. As global interest in Africa intensifies, Ebitu's insights remind us that true power comes not from external alliances, but from internal unity and self-determination. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to follow for more insightful conversations about Africa's role in our changing world.